Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. My name's Gene Quinn. I'm the president and CEO of IPWatchdog, and I have the honor of talking to my good friend Alden Abbott today. Alden, welcome.
Thank you, Gene. Honor to be here.
It's good to have you here in the hot seat. I guess we haven't figured out what to call this segment or what we're doing here, but it won't be too hot. You know, I have a bunch of questions for you about your book, maybe a little preview about what you're going to talk about at IPWatchdog Live next week, and then I know there's a case or two that we want to talk about. But I really appreciate you coming and being here. I've told you this story. I'll say it on the record so everybody can hear it. Is I kind of knew that I had made it in the IP world when I got a call from you and an invite to come to Heritage, and I was so happy that day. I told Renee I've been invited to present at Alden's IP group, and that was a great honor for me. And for those who don't know you, hopefully they'll get a chance to know you a little bit here and during this conversation. But you really are. Sort of the Renaissance man, a little bit IP, a little bit economics, a lot of antitrust. And maybe we start with a question. In your experience, where do you think the system is right now? Is it good, bad, thumbs up, thumbs down?
I think there's a big question mark. I think the current administration has done a number of things that would threaten to weaken patents. For example, the new so-called Inflation Reduction Act allows the negotiation of price ceilings on a number of Medicare-supplied drugs. So-called negotiation where the government obviously will have the upper hand. There's talk about perhaps using the Bayh-Dole Act and 28 U.S.C. 1498, a couple of different statutory provisions, and twisting them to perhaps attempt to impose price ceilings on other pharmaceutical drugs to sort of takings. And the whole premise of this, what's happening there, is the idea that patents somehow are monopolies and that therefore prices are too high. People complain about inflation, particularly people who are dependent on certain pharmaceuticals. And the idea is, well, let's lower the price and everything will be great and prevent the monopolists from exploiting their monopoly, which of course is very bad because it ignores the long-term understanding we thought over the last few decades that patents are recognized as property rights. And you need to return to that property right, certainly in the pharma area, to keep on doing research and development. And, you know, scores of studies have shown that, about 90% of even drugs that make it to original FDA reviews are not going to eventually be released. The pharma companies are required to use their property right to exclude competition to keep investing. If you stop investing, who's going to be hurt? Future patients who don't get cures or treatments for chronic diseases. And they're not seen. They're not in public spotlight, but they're going to suffer. And the idea that all these new treatments, all the new patented drugs sort of drop from the sky is absurd. I mean, the reason why 2/3 of the major pharma productions, new drug introductions in recent decades have come from the U.S. is because companies have come here because they thought that their intellectual property was secure. And more broadly, I'm talking about drugs, but the idea of weakening patents also extends to semiconductors, to other high-tech industries. The reason I say question mark is because, fortunately, the U.S. courts recently have stopped the administration, and in particular the Federal Trade Commission, from abusing antitrust law to try and limit patent rights. So at least antitrust law in the U.S., according to the courts, recognizes patents as property rights, and it's not going to go back to the days of 1970s and earlier when it was very, very hard to license your patent because you were threatened with an antitrust suit.
Yeah. So there's a lot there, and I want to go back and we'll just pick up as much of this as we can from your answer. The negotiation part of the IRA, it's not a negotiation. It's you take what we are offering, government makes you an offer, and if you refuse, then the taxes are over 100, as I understand it, over 100% of all revenues. I mean, the company couldn't possibly refuse the government. It's not a negotiation. It's a negotiation sort of way that used to maybe negotiate with Emperor Commodus, right?
Right.
The emperor's going to get what the emperor wants, and if you don't agree, then it's over for you. I mean, these are company-ending penalties in the billions and billions of dollars if they don't accept what the government's paying. That's not a negotiation.
No, not at all. But that's the term they use. It's sort of a euphemism.
Right. Well, therein lies another part of the problem for the pro-patent community, is the other side is so good at winning the linguistic high ground and saying, because what I've heard people say, what's wrong with negotiating? Well, there's nothing wrong with negotiating if it really was a negotiation, but it's not. And then the other thing I have an issue with is they act as if patents are the reason drugs cost so much, and these drugs take decades sometimes to create in the first instance. And as you pointed out, 90% of them don't make any money. They only lose money. And the FDA process can easily take 8 to 10, 12 years sometimes. I mean, the patent is not the problem in this equation, and people find that ridiculous. But what you can do is you can go and you can look, and there are drugs off patent that are no longer available, and you see some of them are cancer drugs, and you see doctors wishing that there was somebody that would make them, but they don't. I mean, there's all kinds of drugs that are not patented anymore that people can get, but if you prevent industry from making money on the newest and on the best, we're never going to have any more new and best, because that's the other thing, is people believe that the government pays for this research. The government pays for basic science, and then what happens with that basic science takes an awful lot of time to wind up in the pharmacy. And I look at this, and the arguments just don't make any sense.
Right, and I think you just look at a few things like the Bayh-Dole Act, which is now threatened in some people's eyes. Over 40 years ago, it started allowing private parties to get patents with a license to the government, non-exclusive license, if they used government labs. And government labs, which had all sorts of research capabilities, were being underutilized. And lo and behold, suddenly some breakthrough patents were developed at government labs and later at university labs. Now you had major universities getting involved in patent licensing, and this was great for innovation, and that seems to be ignored too. The idea apparently being that, again, there's something bad if people make a profit from using underutilized government resources. So that's another problem. Also, I'll just mention briefly, I spent number of years at the Federal Trade Commission, the last stretch in the last administration as General Counsel, and the investigators in these lawyers who are looking at the pharma industry, they may have the best intentions, but they never talk and they never think about incentives. They're saying, oh, if we don't take this action, X hundred of millions of dollars are not going to go to consumers, and prices are going to be higher than that. They never talk about or think about how did the drug get manufactured or developed in the first place. Right. And it's a mindset which ignores innovation. That's the problem.
They don't understand innovation, and they seem to think that innovation just happens because it just happens because creative people will create, and that is true when the cost of creation and the time involved in the creation is negligible. So, like if you're a hobby musician, in the weekend out in the garage, maybe you plug in your guitar and you just start riffing and you create some stuff. There was really no cost with that. You were just enjoying, So that type of creation is going to happen. But if we want the type of creation where people are going to have to invest hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, that is got to be planned, and it has to result in pay for. And for whatever reason, they don't seem to get that.
Right.
And I'm asking you to explain the impossible, I think.
Yes. No, they don't get that because it's, again, true believers. You know, if you're a prosecutor in government, you believe in your cause. And the reason you're spent, and particularly people who spent years and years there, some people spend a few years and go to law firms and so forth, but people spend their careers there, want to believe in their cause, and they want to believe that what they're doing is great and doesn't have cost. It's sort of, and I don't see really how you change that, except, as I say, when courts start saying, you've got this new theory that's inconsistent with prior antitrust law, you're going to lose. And if that happens enough, they're just going to have to stop bringing some of these cases. But the threat of bringing these cases, particularly in the pharma area, is discouraging to potential acquisitions of and potential innovative activity.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I think that we're giving them them being pharma and biotech, exactly the wrong incentives. You know, I mean, they can make a ton of money on lifestyle drugs. And frankly, if I were a pharmaceutical CEO, I don't know why, if what we were trying to do is make money for the company, why would you try and do anything other than that kind of inventing? Because there's no argument that under TRIPS countries can take it away from you because it's not life-saving. But if you come up with something that's truly life-saving, that everybody's going to want, and that, you know, in 10 to 14 years, everybody will be able to have a generic for, they want to take it away from you. It just doesn't make a hill of bean sense to me.
No, but it's sort of a constraint we have to live with. And I think you've got more studies. I know one positive thing is there's a lot more research in recent years on showing the strength of the patent system is positively correlated with innovation, much faster economic growth in lots of countries, and that restrictions on patents really harm innovation. So I think you've just got to have more of that research, and then get an administration, or get, I don't care, Republican or Democrat administration, but get leaders in government here and overseas to understand and see those studies and be convinced that, hey, we're going to undermine the interests of our people if we weaken patents too much.
Yeah. No, I agree. And you look at the studies where the most economic development occurs, where the most economic investment occurs, where the most thriving economies occur, and it's all because of innovation, and it's because of stronger patent rights, and it brings us, and it's just simple. If you're trying to locate your business somewhere, and you're an innovative company that depends on strong patent rights, you have to locate in a place that recognizes strong patent rights. Because one of the biggest threats that companies have is not their competitors, it's their own people. If their own people can learn what's going on and then leave and do something, they're going to be essentially competing against themselves. So these companies have to locate in jurisdictions where strong patent rights, good trade secret laws, and the ability to enforce both. And it seems so self-evident, but it's not. I mean, you were just talking about an antitrust case. I think that was we were emailing back and forth. It was over the last week or two, dealing with the FTC, I think, right? Right. Can you tell us a little about that?
Well, there are a number of them. There was a Horizon Amgen case recently, which was the FTC trying to block a merger of two pharma companies whose drugs didn't directly compete. So where's the antitrust problem? Well, they said, well, drugs might get bundled together in an anti-competitive way. Finally, there was a settlement where no bundling was agreed to. A year ago, there are a number of FTC cases, but basically it was clear, I think, the FTC was going to lose that case, and this was a settlement the company could agree to. A year ago, in the Seventh Circuit, in the AbbVie case, ABBVIE, the pharma company. The FTC lost. Judge Easterbrook ruled for the company and was joined by Diana Wood, well-known judge who's a Democrat. And basically, the theory of the FTC was, well, AbbVie has too many patents, 150 patents, and therefore it's extending its monopoly because we think, even if some patents get knocked down, they keep asserting new patents, and that's a barrier to entry and barrier to competition. And Judge Easterbrook said, well, this a property right is a property right. This is not correct. You have a right to assert as many legitimate patents as you have. And that, I think, helps knock down, particularly get someone like Judge Wood, who's a well-known antitrust lawyer, that knocks down this whole patent ticket story that was 10, 15 years ago, said, oh, companies are getting too many patents on a particular device or on a particular, you think, drug, not a one molecule drug. Why are you getting many different patents? Well, there's reasons why. You can justify them. But that, I think, is going to harm and weaken the FTC's stance. There was impacts and the Ando case. So this is a case where the FTC went after an exclusive license. And since 1928, since the General Electric case, Supreme Court said an exclusive patent license, where you exclusively license your patent to somebody else and decide to stop producing, you have every right to do that.
That one really shocked me.
And this was basically, they tried to dress it up, but they said, oh, this Endo with company, and these were it's a controversial case, but, well, they've licensed their patent and are going to stop producing and let Impacts, a much larger company, produce the generic. And there would have been competition between the generic and the drug, and that competition is destroyed. And the court said, no, this makes no sense. This is an exclusive license. And it was a claim that, well, there were payments going, but the Supreme Court, I think, made one mistake they made in the patent antitrust was about 7 years ago in a case called Activist, where they said if you see a settlement and the patent holder is paying somebody who's brought an infringement case and making a payment to them, that's just a payment to defend a monopoly that must be bad. The court said, no, you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. But now the FTC has gone way beyond that. In this Impacts case, they were saying here's a regular license payment going from to the patent holder from the potential licensee. That's traditional exclusive license. And they say, oh, they dress it up and they say, oh, this is somehow anti-competitive. And which was just a crazy case, I think.
Yeah, I mean, because that would, for them to have won that case, the FTC, to have won that case, it would have called into question all patent licenses.
Yes, exactly.
And if I have the right, why can't I transfer that right to you without selling it? I can license exclusive license for all time or for a period of time.
And this was moving away from something that had been sort of bipartisan understanding. And starting in the 1980s, the FTC got rid of the so-called 9 no-nos policy. Prior Justice Departments said most patent licenses are pro-competitive. Unless you've got some sort of cartel conspiracy or something, most exclusive licenses, grant backs, things of that sort create incentives for innovation downstream. Antitrust generally won't attack them. Guidelines in 95 and 2017 issued by the Justice Department and the FTC basically made that point. But the Federal Trade Commission seemingly now was totally rejecting that tradition. So I'm hoping that this will warn them not to bring a dumb case like this. But you can't. The problem currently, and I won't get into it, that's beyond the scope of our talk, is currently, particularly Federal Trade Commission, is bringing cases that make no sense. And but that's a different conversation.
Yeah, a different conversation for a different day. But it seems, though, I mean, maybe the conversation that kind of fits with what we're talking about, a lot of these theories that are being brought today to try and weaken patents and punish patent owners are the same types of arguments and cases that have been made and brought 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And it seems like all of these truly bad ideas just constantly get recycled. And like you mentioned, Bayh-Dole. Bayh-Dole took a situation where university technology was being patented and then never commercialized. Never.
Yeah.
And it created a system where now it is being commercialized. And I don't know what the number is right now, but it was something like 0 drugs prior to Bayh-Dole created by universities were commercialized and made it to market. And there's upwards of 130 since Bayh-Dole that have made it to market, including many cancer treatments, life-saving treatments, and the like. And there's people who want to go back and do away with Bayh-Dole. And it's like, well, we know what that world looked like because we lived in that world for a very long time. And it seems as if these thought experiments are prized more than actual empirical evidence.
Right, and I think the problem is pressure from the Hill. As I say, you've got senators sending letters. Drugs cost too much. We need to change legal provisions that allow monopoly prices to be charged for years by big pharma, or sort of like a villain. And you know that. Yeah. How do you answer that? It's not a logic. It's not an argument based on economic logic. But it's a populist argument.
Right.
An attempt maybe to respond to inflation. Hey, it's those big bad companies who are responsible for inflation, and we need to change the law to clamp it down and restrict them.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean, you know, like hamburger costs too much, milk costs too much, gas, everything costs too much now. I mean, the problem with this is there's no end. Once you pull that thread, the suit is unraveled, and everything costs more than what people want, except with one exception. I always tell people this: when you feel the worst and you've gone to the doctor, and you feel like you're at death's door because you got some infection, you know, whether it be, you know, like an ear infection turns into maybe upper respiratory infection, or you got bronchitis or pneumonia or whatever you have, you go to the pharmacy, and the drugs that you get are going to be very cheap usually.
Yep. Because
you're going to get prescribed antibiotics, and there have been no real new antibiotics come to market in a very long time. And so you get a bottle of pills for 10 days, and it may cost like $2 or $3. And that's without insurance. So I always try and remind people, is like, remember the next time you go to the pharmacy and you feel really bad, right. There was a time when those drugs cost more money because of the incentive structure necessary in order to get that company to invest and make them. And I don't know. I guess we just have to keep fighting the fight, because it doesn't seem like it's ever going to end.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the wonder of these drugs. It allows people to live their lives, carry out their professions, and maybe you need more examples like that, or people willing to put forth examples.
Yeah, I suppose you do, but you know, I think if people are honest with themselves, everybody knows somebody that has some kind of a similar type story, right? Or you know, you lost a loved one, and then years later there became a cure for that disease, you know, or a treatment, or things. And I don't understand how and why they can allow their what seems to be short-term political gain. You know, we got to reduce the costs of these drugs, yes, and then we'll get no more. You know, how can you allow short-term political gain to really cause the damage? And then it's a cascade for a minute. Then you have groups like IMAC that go out there and just outright lie. They're liars. You know, they'll say like Novartis has 80 or 90 patents on a certain drug, when in fact they have 4. And the way that they come up with the 80 or 90 number is by counting patent applications that have become abandoned and will never result in any exclusive rights, but they call them patents. And the New York Times prints their lies, and the Wall Street Journal prints their lies, and their lies are spewed in congressional hearings as if they're true. and I don't know how do you fight people who are willing to lie, because the lie is it feeds into what people already want to believe.
Right. If you tell a lie enough times, people will believe it, or at least a substantial portion of people will believe it, and that's what's unfortunate.
Yeah, and I suppose that's right, because, well, you learn that sort of in trial ad, right? You got to say everything. The important stuff you got to say at least 3 times, because the first time the jury hears it, they're skeptical because they've never heard it before. The second time they hear it, they're more receptive because, well, I've heard that once before. And then the third time they hear it, well, it's fact because I've heard it twice before. And that, I think, is what goes on. And with a group like IMAC, they know. They know. It's been pointed out to them. It's been pointed out to the reporters that continue to cite them. It's been pointed out to the members of Congress that continue to cite them. And it's convenient. It's like that $29 billion figure on patent litigation that just even the authors of that study recanted, and then it continued to get used. And it's a shame. I mean, I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah. Well, hopefully there'll be an answer. I think going back to the 60s and 70s, most mergers were illegal. Patent licenses were generally illegal. And it changed, but you had new leaders in government who followed sound economics and the science and changed policy. You just need leaders who were willing to change policy, and let's hope that happens.
Yeah, definitely. So now I know you've written a book that got published. It got published, I think, in last spring, right?
Right.
And I know you tackle a lot of these international trade and IP issues. Can you tell us a little bit about what you and your co-author were hoping to accomplish?
Sure. My co-author, Shanker Singham, is an Anglo-American lawyer and economist, and in recent years he's been a senior advisor to the British government. And in this book called Competition, Trade, and Domestic Regulatory Policy, looked at the history of trade liberalization, which and changes in antitrust, competition law, and regulations, and said a real goal of liberalizing trade, it makes it easier for parties to trade across borders. True competition means not just tough laws, it means allowing companies to compete freely and aggressively. We talked about the pharma companies. And all of these things really require a focus on consumer welfare, which drives innovation. Unfortunately, we said there's been a growing number of restrictions created by government, which make it harder often to compete. Licensing restrictions make it harder for foreign companies to come in. Sometimes antitrust law itself can be overly restrictive. So the idea was that you need to measure the cost of these restrictions. Now, Singham and some economist friends did a study of India that suggested it would have, if it got rid of its major restrictions, would have the 5th biggest economy in the world, and desperate poverty, 300 million people would be lifted out of desperate poverty. So what we did was talk about the key importance of intellectual property rights in creating the incentives to innovate and to expand trade. Trade itself, getting rid of trade barriers to allow new goods and services to cross borders. There was a big liberalization, say from after World War II, some trade negotiations to the 90s, but there's been a big slowdown the last 20 years. So it's really, if we want to lift the world, not just the poor countries out of poverty, but push economic growth, we need to get rid of these restrictions. And interestingly enough, in the last 20 years, the richest countries, most developed countries, they've had a real slowdown in innovation and a slowdown in economic growth. And we argued that there's good reason to believe a lot of it has to do with restrictions of this sort. And we said that as a trade, if you start being able to measure them, you could in bilateral, multilateral agreements say, okay, if you are preventing goods or services from competing in our market, or which is a big problem. There, you can target the costs to our consumers and say, okay, we may not give you access, for example, to procurements in our country, but more importantly, we may target the cost to offset this. It sounds like an old-time countervailing duty, which is an old trade remedy, but the basic idea is that it will be applied targeted to specific abuses of trade, such as if you can spot particular abuses in China, some other jurisdictions. So, and right now, we've taken this idea. There's something called a growth commission set up in the United Kingdom, chaired by the former UK Prime Minister Liz Truss, and it's nonpartisan, but it's pulled together some economists to study this issue, and we're doing an actually quantitative study. To what extent is per capita gross domestic product growth correlated with the strength of intellectual property protection as one, the strength of domestic competition, and the strength of international trade competition. And intellectual property, as I say, is one of them. And we're breaking that down. We're doing some of these studies, and there's a lot of recent research that shows that in the area of regulation has restricted competition. That has slowed GDP. We think we can also do some studies to show how patents, how weakening of intellectual property has slowed GDP growth, and restrictions on trade liberalization. And there'll be reports coming out later this fall, and the idea is to take this, globally. At least it's going to be released in the UK, probably a few months, a bunch of reports, but the principles are sort of universal. And, to the extent, even though it may not be perfect, to the extent you can actually show, hey, there's a real showing here that if you strengthen intellectual property, you are strengthening per capita income growth, making people better off. And if you weaken it, you're causing a slowdown, which we've seen in recent years. Yeah. That's the sort of thing that might be helpful. And to get government, say the UK government makes some findings, and again, we're looking at statistics from all kinds of countries, not just the UK, and I think it's an exciting project. And who knows, but it's one little way in which we're trying to promote the idea about the importance of competition, of protecting intellectual property, and how this is the real world. Societies are richer, and because economic growth compounds, just like inflation. So if you slow economic growth by 1% less one year and 1% the next, these numbers become huge. After a few years, you get a large percentage of gross domestic product, huge percentage smaller than it would have been absent a slowdown in growth. So I think this is exciting. Who knows what's going to come out of it? But again, as a plug, our book is called Trade, Competition, and Domestic Regulatory Policy, published in 2023 by Routledge Press, an English press.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, the economics that go into innovation and intellectual property, and driving countries out of doldrums and into achieving real growth. And I sit and I listen to this, and it should, again, it seems to me, be self-evident to anybody who takes a look. We haven't had real disruptive technology for some time, and the reason why you don't see disruptive technology is because the smaller companies are the ones that take the risk to innovate, and they can't compete against the large entities who then, once a small company has innovated, they can just come in and take it away. And by design, patents are supposed to be strong so that you can't do that. So two things happen. One, if I think I can make better resources of what your rights are, then I can do a deal with you in order to acquire your rights and pay you for your time and energy to get this far. Or I have to invent around you. And that's where you really get the cascading effect of innovation blossoming. And when we live in a society where it is so easy for large companies to take what small companies have created, and there's really no recourse for that, you get what you see right now, is you don't have a lot of innovation. You wind up with the same types of things over and over again and repackaged over and over again.
Right.
And you know, the older I get, the more I think Dilbert is not a comic strip. Dilbert is a documentary. I mean, it's, people don't advance in large companies by taking risk, because if you take risk and you lose, then it blows back on you.
Mm-hmm.
Where you take risk is when you're trying to break in, when you're trying to come up in the small entities, and the founder is the chief innovator, and you know, the person who's working on the line or bench is maybe 1 or 2 degrees separated from the founder who invented the technology, and decisions can be streamlined and made in quick ways, and you just don't see that in large entities. It's really rare for a large entity to be disruptively innovative.
Right. And again, sometimes theoretical harms, as again when antitrust comes up, are put forth to prevent real progress. Just last one example, the Illumina Grail case where a company, biotech company, spun off a small company with some scientists who doing research into blood cancers, and they came up with this wonderful procedure. You can predict early, before any symptoms, 50 different cancers through a blood draw, but it takes a while. It would take years to get intellectual property on this and the tests themselves approved. So the founding company said, we'll buy it up. We know how to get things through the FDA process. And what happens, the FTC said, no, you can't buy it up, because that's going to harm future firms that don't exist from competing against and with their own blood tests. Well, this is crazy. Basically, what the theory is, in a non-existent market, and you're preventing blood tests that can help detect cancers before it's too late from coming to market earlier. It makes no sense.
No, it doesn't make any sense at all. And it also, you know, I smile because they say, oh, this would block. That's the whole point of a patent. The whole point of a patent is to block. It is to protect the innovator. And patents are strong, as I say, just to repeat myself, specifically by design, in order to force you that if you don't want to pay the patent owner, you don't want to acquire the patent owner's company or the patent owner's portfolio, well, now you've got to take the next step and innovate in a broader way. If everybody can copy what everybody else is doing, there's no incentive to innovate. And we see that. You see that all over. And you see copying and weak rights and stagnation of innovation. And I personally don't get it. You know, and the frustrating thing for me is the stuff that we used to promote around the world, much of the rest of the world is starting to adopt, you know, over the last 5 years or so.
Right.
And they're succeeding, and they're going to succeed at a much greater rate than we will, because it's like looking in a mirror.
Right.
And I know that's a little bit about what you guys are going to talk about when you open up live next on the 17th on the panel about the global IP system. Right. I mean, can you give us just a quick preview of what you're going to be discussing?
Well, we've got three real, apart from me just writing about them, three real people active in the IP industry, General Counsel, 2 other experts, and I think we're going to look at the strength of the IP system worldwide. In some respects, as you said, Europe is it's easier to get injunctions in Europe. The idea of compulsory licensing drugs, more and more drugs, which is getting some support in the U.S. Europeans are less willing to look at that. They are very regulatory, but at the same time, I think there's starting to be a realization that patents are important. And look at the situation in the U.S. We already talked a little about that today, and then more globally, you know, what's the prospect, I think, for I think licensing is fascinating. It's a huge, because there's a big study by Professor Dan Svolber called The Case for Patents, showing the importance of licensing. And to the extent that patents are protected and can be licensed, you're spreading the technology worldwide. And perhaps we can get into that. But I'm not going to say anything more. I think we're still finalizing it, but I think it'll be a very good panel, the opening panel of your annual conference.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think the panel is going to be really good. I always try and put people together that have different perspectives, and I think that what you guys will discuss is going to be very exciting and a good way to start the program. So
great.
So is there anything else that I should have asked you that I haven't asked you?
Oh, I don't. I could go on and on for hours about this, but this is important stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we get the message out, that scholars and business people. There's a professor at George Mason Law School, Adam Mossoff, who's written a lot, and is pointing out the falsity, as you pointed out, false accusations about the number of patents, false analyses of laws that could be used to restrict prices, price fix patents. I think we need this out there, and we need hearings, perhaps congressional hearings where the case for patents gets made. And and I think you need to convince more people out there. Certainly, politicians get some people pointing out, and maybe, as I said, our studies, hard facts or hard studies that suggest you weaken patents, you hurt the economy. That maybe will give people pause to stop calling for the breaking of our patent system.
Yeah, that would be a positive thing, and hopefully Congress will start to do some stuff that will pull back and realize just how important this is. And they will. We know they will. It's just a matter of when. Things got pretty bleak during the 70s, and then it turned around. But it can't turn around fast enough because the rest of the world is catching up, if not moving beyond us.
That's right. But the one thing you point out in the Pandora's box, the Greek myth, when everything flies out, all these bad things fly out, the one thing that remains, doesn't fly out, is hope. So, and that's important. Hold on to hope and get the word out, and at least there's some good legislative proposals out there.
Yeah.
Who knows if they'll be enacted, but build momentum to make the case for a strong IP system.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Alden. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you coming and doing this.
And thank you, Gene. I really appreciate the time. Sure. And IPWatchdog does terrific work in promoting the IP system, and long may it thrive.
Well, thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you soon.